Hi, I'm Randall here in Texas.
And I'm Matt here in Michigan. Randall and I have decided to go back and watch the Star Wars prequel films now that the sequel movies are out and Star Wars Clone Wars has been out. And today we're going to start with 1999's Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. This Star Wars movie stars Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman, Jake Lloyd, Ahmed Best, and Ian McDiarmid. It's directed by George Lucas. This is the first movie of the Skywalker saga. It's basically about a young queen and her Jedi protectors trying to free her land from, or her planet, I should say, from an invading force. And along the way, they find this mysterious young boy, and in the background is this shadowy figure trying to gain power. This movie was very highly anticipated coming out. I think that might be an understatement. I mean, people were lined up for days, weeks, possibly even months to see this film.
Easily one of the most anticipated films of the 20th century.
Oh, Star Wars fans waited 16 years or so to see this film, so their anticipation was pretty high. It had a budget of $115 million, but with the theatrical release and the 3D release, it has earned more than $1 billion. Critics had some mixed things to say about this film when it originally came out. There was some aspects of the film that they praised, and then other parts of the film that they didn't like so much. Some people have even gone to say that this may be one of the worst Star Wars films made, but it is Star Wars, and regardless of how it fits, Star Wars still has an impact on pop culture. So, Randall, what do you think about The Phantom Menace?
So I'll just get it out of the way right away. It's not as bad as I would remember it, honestly. After years of not having watched it, which is kind of why we wanted to take a look back at the prequels, is when was the last time you actually watched the prequels? You know? Instead of just listening to what everyone was saying about the prequels. And, a lot has been said about them.
I have a bad feeling about this.
All that said, after watching it, I can understand where there are things that break down, where things that could have gone better, where things went off the rails. I can watch it. But I got done with it, and I thought to myself, that's not as bad as my whatever the opposite of rose-colored glasses is would tell me it is. And in reality, I sat there and I said to my wife, I said, this is better than Rise of Skywalker. Better than Rise of Skywalker. Not joking. So that's just sitting down and having not watched it in literally years. It wasn't as bad as I remember it.
This is a movie I haven't seen in a while. Me being a big Star Wars fan too, I don't think I've seen this movie since the 3D release too. So it's been quite a while since I've seen this film. And I agree with you. It's not as bad as I remembered before. Overall, I think this movie had a lot of potential. The story, I think, is actually good. I think George Lucas had good ideas with the story when it comes to it. Now, there are other aspects, like we were saying, that don't work as well. Like, I don't think the dialogue works as well in this film.
You thinking people gonna die?
And there is some story choices that I don't think really add up with the good of film. But one big thing is, I think I had to change the way I watch this movie or how I think about this movie. When this movie came out, I was comparing it to the original trilogy. We were waiting 16 years. I don't know that any movie would really live up to people's expectations for that. But I think this movie feels different than the original trilogy, and that is what has been a negative for me on this. But I guess I gotta watch it separate as a different beast of its own, a different movie kind of its own, than trying to lump it in with the original trilogy movies. And another thing, I was saying I have to watch this differently too. Some of the CG at the time, it was cutting edge. And some of the CG still holds up today, but some of the CG characters I don't think as much. And I almost gotta watch this as like watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I gotta kind of think of those like alien creatures or like Jar Jar or Watto as kind of like cartoon characters also with like a real world thing. And if I watch it like that and think of it that way, I enjoyed the film a whole lot more.
So I wasn't going to get into it till later, but since you've already mentioned it, the CGI, I have it noted down. I even have a star next to it. Most of it has aged well. A vast majority of it has aged very well. The machines, the pod racing, the ships, the background CGI has aged pretty decently, all things considered. But yeah, 100% nail, hammer, bah. The characters that you need to work, Jar Jar and Watto and Sebulba, their CGI doesn't hold up as well. And especially when you compare it to Lord of the Rings, which was coming out and being filmed around the same time and using motion capture instead of doing full CGI, like they did with Star Wars. Gollum has aged much, much better than a lot of these CGI characters have. And more to that point is some of the characters that they didn't have the budget for, or they didn't want to CGI, that they ended up making out of just prosthetics and more practical costuming. They've aged really well, apparently, except for Yoda. I don't know why they had to go back and replace Yoda's Muppet, but like the alien that is on Jar Jar's case for trying to steal food. That's just a suit. It's not CGI. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, so his mouth doesn't move perfect or anything, but he still looks great. Much better than the CGI. But by and large, I do want to give credit where it's deserved. A lot of the CGI does age very well.
I think another thing that you're pointing on too is the fact that it has both CGI and practical effects. A lot of people don't realize this, but this movie has like the most practical effects of just about any Star Wars film, especially with kind of like the pod racing and the crowd and stuff in the arena. A lot of people don't realize how much is actually practical effects in this movie. But yeah, the characters kind of like stand out. I almost got to look at them and be like, all right, it's kind of like that cartoon world, like I already mentioned, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, especially with the pod racing and stuff. Because earlier we have Jar Jar, and Jar Jar gets a lot of flack because he feels out of place. He doesn't really feel like he fits in with the rest of the Star Wars universe, at least up to this point, up until we got to this movie. But then when we get to the pod race scene and we see all like the pod racers and stuff and how they're kind of like goofy cartoon characters, Jar Jar fits with them. And that's the thing too. And I think that's both a plus of this movie and kind of a negative. I think if you look at the movie that way, and look at them as more cartoon characters, they're more enjoyable too. But at the same time too, there's this weird thing going on in this movie where there's parts that feel like real world and are like serious. And then we also have all these cartoon it's almost like we have two worlds kind of like coming together. And I think that, I wouldn't say jarring, but it keeps the movie from flowing as like one cohesive thing.
I do think this film, in particular, episode 1, deserves credit, and probably to some extent episode 2, but I haven't rewatched it yet, but this one deserves credit. The alien races and their technology really stick out to me, and I like that it's so different from one another. So as opposed to like the Star Trek world where, okay, the Vulcans, they have ships, but they just pretty much look like, the ships look different, for example, than the Federation ships, but they pretty much feel the same. The Klingons have the same ships. No, that is not how it is in episode 1. When you first see the Republic cruiser, you look at it and you're like, you know what? I can see a hint of Corellian Corvette in there from A New Hope, Just a hint, just a little bit. And it looks like something that you would expect from the Republic, basically. But then you get to the Nubian starfighters and the Nubian ships, and they look completely different. Super sleek, super clean designs. And then you get to see the Gungans, and they're on the same planet as the Naboo, and they have their own individual design, and they have their own individual aesthetic. I applaud that like crazy. because that is a lot of work. That is a lot of CGI. That is a lot of model making. That is just incredible amounts of imagination going into making each individual race have their own little special feel to them, which is probably how, a non-conglomerate or gentrified universe or galaxy would look. So I give him great credit for that.
So this is the first movie in the Skywalker saga, but I don't think that this is the movie where you can start off by watching. I think that's a problem a little bit with this film. I think you do have to watch this film with knowledge of the original trilogy, at least the first two movies, A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. And I think A New Hope does a good job of introducing you to, like, who are the Jedi? What is this power, the Force? In this movie, you're talking about at the beginning, we're just kind of thrown with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. We don't really explain what they are. We just know they're Jedi. We don't really know why Newt Gunray or them kind of like revere them or respect them kind of thing. And the first time we hear really them talk, other than Qui-Gon, telling the crew like where to land and stuff, is basically like Obi-Wan going on talking about, I'm seeing this stuff in like the future, which that stuff kind of makes sense when you already know what Jedi are and some things that the Jedi can do. But to just throw that in the movie, if this is the first time you've ever seen a Star Wars film, you're like, what the heck are they talking about? Who the heck are these people? Why do I care? So that's one thing, is I think that's kind of a little detriment, at least how I think, to this film. If you're gonna watch this film and you've never seen the Star Wars films, I do recommend that you watch like A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back before you watch this film, so you aren't just like sitting like, what the heck is going on in this film? I don't understand anything in this universe. It's almost like, going into Harry Potter and having wizards just doing, everything and not describing that they're wizards at all. We generally know what wizards are, not even just in the context of Harry Potter. They're in lots of different things. Jedi are specific to Star Wars. So unless you know about Star Wars...
No, they're space wizards. What are you talking about?
Well, that's the thing. They don't call them space wizards. They call them Jedi. If you say, hey, these space wizards... I'd be like, oh, okay, this all makes sense. They're space wizards.
There's definitely parts in this movie where things just don't make sense and things just happen for the sake of the fact that the script tells them they have to happen. Number one, really, really early, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, they come in, they land, they get escorted to a conference room. The droid goes back and talks to the Trade Federation, and they're like, hey, I'm not going in there with the Jedi. And then they contact our Sidious, the shadowy figure, the Phantom Menace, He says, kill him. And so they put dioxygen into the room, and they're like, they must be dead by now. Go check them out. No! Just leave them in there. Lock the door. Leave them in there for hours. Who cares? They must be dead by now. Open the door. Let them out. Right away, there's a really stupid thing that happens. Because it has to happen. The Jedi don't escape. They get let out.
And it's not like A New Hope where they, Darth Vader let the rebels escape so they could track them to the rebel base. Yeah. No. This time they get out.
They don't get out. They get let out. I think that you get to a point where George Lucas in episode 1 was like, all right, I have this idea. We're going to do this really cool scene, a pod racing scene. It's going to be like 15 minutes long. It's a big bulk of the movie, and it is awesome. I love the pod racing scene. But we never should have got to that scene. So, besides the fact that Qui-Gon was apparently unwilling to check any other vendors, because you would never cross-shop, ever, and that Watto won't take his Republic credits, which doesn't make any sense because there has to be some form of currency exchange. I've got tons and tons. I'll overpay you for it. I have more Republican credits than I know what to do with.
No money, no parts, no deal.
Fine. Anything to get us to the pod racing scene. Anything to get us to the little kid boy wizard. Good idea. Interesting idea for a story. The script doesn't get you there in a good way. And then you get to like, hey, we have this brand new fancy ship. Sell the ship! Anything. There are so many other better ways that their situation on Tatooine could have been handled than the way they were.
One scene I want to talk about in particular, or I guess group of scene, is near the end, kind of the climax where we got a lot of different things going on. We have like the lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Darth Maul. At the same time, we have Queen Amidala and her attack forces trying to take over the palace. And we also have the Gungans fighting the droid army to lure the droid army away from the palace. And then we have the space battle with the Naboo starfighters and Anakin taking on the droid ships. Two of those, I would say the lightsaber fight and the Queen's attack on the palace feel very serious, feel in-world, like real-world kind of thing, and kind of add to that tension. And I think the other two scenes detract from that. The Gungan fight, even though excellent looking, droid army and stuff, amazing, but with all of Jar Jar's goofy hijinks and stuff, it takes away the tension. Also with the starfighters, we have this like Star Wars. That's where you get some of those like big like tension moments. Like in A New Hope, it's kind of like, oh, the Death Star could fire on Yavin 4 soon, and we need to take out the Death Star before that happens. We have that tension. Here we have,
I'll try spinning. That's a good trick.
It's one thing to have comic relief in a film, but it's a bad spot to put it. So there is comic relief to some extent in Return of the Jedi's ending with the Ewoks and everything, but it's still a desperate situation happening with Luke and a desperate situation happening with the fleet attack on the Death Star while the shield is still up. Like, you still get tension on all three of those battlefronts. And on this one, the starfighters, the Naboo starfighters, are not having the impact, and it could have been tenseful. It could have fit in, but instead, you have a 8 or 10-year-old or however old he is flying a starfighter that he has no reason flying just to put comic relief in, or because it doesn't show that he's like extraordinarily gifted or anything. He's just dumb lucky, Anakin. The ending, like the most of the film, could have been better.
it's one of those things where you make a decision. Is this a kid's movie? I mean, if this is a kid's movie, then why are we having all these trade dispute things? Why are we having all this Senate scene stuff? Like, kids aren't going to care about that stuff. And then the same thing. All right, so, well, maybe it's for the original fans or whatever. I mean, if it's for the original fans, why do we have these characters that feel so out of place with the original films? This feels real foreign from the other films. And I think that's kind of what gets to me on this. I think it's trying to appeal to more than just one audience, which is good. You want to do that. But the same thing, too, it has the movie kind of alienates those ones, too. It's like being inclusive to different ones, like being a kid's one, and then also doing some stuff to like help the older ones. But the other time, too, it just makes the movie feel foreign to itself in a lot of parts. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I notice about this movie.
Everyone now is defending him, or they say, well, you know, as you even pointed out in one of our previous videos, like, at least he had a coherent idea for a storyline, and the three films all work together. But don't give George Lucas too much credit. The prequels are looked upon poorly by the vast majority of people because of George Lucas, his writing, his directing, some of the very wooden acting that goes into it, which, again, director. So don't give him too much credit and be like, hey, he needs to replace Kathleen Kennedy working for Lucasfilm. Like, you know what? Sure, if you wanted to go into the microbiotic realm of the wills of the Force, then yes. That would have been a boring trilogy.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned too is the wooden acting and stuff, and so let's touch on the acting in this film. Two actors specifically, I think, do really well in this film. I think Liam Neeson does an excellent job as Qui-Gon Jinn in this film. I also think Ian McDiarmid does an incredible job as both Senator Palpatine, Chancellor Palpatine, and the mysterious Darth Sidious that we talked about too. I think they do two excellent jobs. Some other characters I think are a little hit or miss. I think Natalie Portman has some moments where she shines a little bit, and other parts where it's just like, okay. Jake Lloyd too, I think, has some moments where he shined, and other parts where you're just like,
I'm a person, and my name is Anakin.
And I don't think it's necessarily them as actors. We go about talking about George Lucas's directing, also the script writing. Some of the scenes where Natalie Portman and Jake Lloyd together, I think there's a difference kind of with like story. I think George Lucas had a good idea with like story, but like the dialogue and what they actually say to try to tell that story doesn't necessarily work out in a lot of these scenes where you're kind of like, that is an interesting choice of words that you chose there in that scene.
Many things will change when we reach the capital, Annie. But my caring for you will remain.
So that's where I go kind of on that, and that's how I feel about acting and stuff in this film. And I, kind of looking ahead to some of the other prequel movies, I really do like Obi-Wan and stuff, but in this film, Obi-Wan's kind of, just sideline, kind of on the back. He isn't really a standout character to really talk about Ewan McGregor in this film.
And I think that it's important, and I know that other reviewers have definitely pointed it out. It's like, all right, who's the main character in The Phantom Menace? And you're like, well, it can't be Qui-Gon, and it's not Anakin, and it's not Obi-Wan, and there's not like this like main character, and maybe Queen Amidala, Natalie Portman's character, but she's doing so much subterfuge in this. Most of the movie she goes through being Padme the Handmaiden. It's really hard, and the acting doesn't help it. You're like 100%. Ian McGregor was not quite there yet as Obi-Wan. He's definitely like the quintessential almost Obi-Wan come time for episode 2 and 3, but not quite there for this one, definitely. I don't want to go in and say every single little thing that's wrong, because again, this film has so many things that kind of just don't work on such a fundamental level, and so many things that were very well thought out and well done. And it's a disappointment to me still, even though it's not as bad as I remember it being, that it could have been better if George Lucas had taken input from other people, had let some other people go over his script, had actually not had such the ego he did making it. It could have been much better than it ended up being.
I agree with you, Randall. I do like this more than I did originally, but some of that stuff still is very frustrating.
So, Matt and I are going to be doing episode 2 and episode 3. Keep an eye out for those. We recently did a whole playlist where we went back and looked at all of the original crew movie Star Trek films. So if you're interested in these kinds of look backs at kind of where we've been and where we've come from, make sure to check that one out as well. Now granted, it's Star Trek, not Star Wars, but get a feel for it. If you like this kind of content, we have lots of flashback reviews on our channel. Make sure to give our channel a check. Give this video a like, give us a subscribe, and ring the bell icon if you always want to see what's coming out next. And check us out on our Facebook page. We're always going to let you know the day in advance what is coming out. For now, I'm Randall here in Texas. See everyone later.
And I'm Matt here in Michigan. Have a great day. Next time on No Market Media. Please consider checking out some of our other videos.